What happens when you don't exactly fit in a restaurant kitchen, but you want a career in food? Find out when I interview Alexandra Leaf next. Hello everybody, and welcome back to Uncommon Sense. We have a wonderful program ahead for us, and I really want to tell you how nice it is to be on the porch again on this wonderful, beautiful day in mid-Michigan with the sun out and the leaves new on the tree. With me today is Alexandra Leaf of New York. She is in town because she is a guest of the Matrix Midland Festival, and she will be speaking on chocolate, one of my favorite things, tonight. And so we're very glad to have you, Alexandra, here in Midland from New York. Alexandra has a very interesting background, or at least it's very interesting to me, because she has clearly academic talent. She has a master's in comparative literature from New York University, and I also read that you're fluent in Italian and French, which to me says that she has a very good ear and a very good brain. But she has written 2 books that have to do with art, artists, and food. And, you know, food is really quite a different sense. That's a taste sense. So I guess I would be interested with your clear talents for language and your clear talents for mental ability. How did the taste come around? What drew you to that aspect of life, other than 3 meals a day?
Yes, well, growing up in my house, the table was a very important place. Every night, probably when a lot of other families had a television running during their meal, I don't know, we sat at the table and we shared the experiences of the day. So the table and food, there was something significantly social about it. And of course, when I was in graduate school in the 80s in New York, it was the tall, stacked food. It was the emergence of American gastronomy. So everything that I was seeing that pertained to food was very restaurant-based, and I understood that a restaurant was not the environment for me. I spent 2 nights in a top restaurant, sort of training and trying to discover whether this was something I wanted to do. And I'm awfully glad after the first night that the chef barked at me, "Come back tomorrow, it was too busy, I didn't see you work." Because it was having spent that second night, I just thought, I'm very interested in food. This is a top restaurant, but something feels so wrong to me. So I marched myself to the Fifth Avenue train station. It was midnight there. I was sitting alone, and I thought, what is this? I love food, but this is not appropriate for me. And it was probably just a chance conversation I had with one of my professors in this comp lit program at NYU, who, when I said that I wasn't really thinking about the doctorate because I wanted to do something with food, but it wasn't in a restaurant, it was something that pertained to history and culture, he asked me if I had ever read this particular French book, and I said no, and that book changed my life, I have to say. And that was, it sounds very dramatic, a life-changing conversation, but had he not shown me that there was this whole world of culinary history, which now is big here.
Right,
every university press, many universities have, you know, food and culture departments or food studies departments. That really didn't exist in the 80s.
No, it didn't.
Not in this country, but in Europe, particularly France, it was very developed. So I read that book, and I suddenly got the thesis for my first book. It wasn't quite as simple as that.
Right.
But little by little, I began to put the pieces together. So it was really the social component, is people getting together and communicating through food.
What was the book?
It's a book. The author is Jean-Paul Aron, A-R-O-N. The translation,
Great accent.
there is a translation in English, which is usually something like food in France in the 19th century, but it's, you know, le mangeur du 19e siècle, the eater of the 19th century. And the study is very much focused on foodways and gastronomy in France in the 19th century, which was the period that interested me because it coincided with the Impressionists.
Right.
And so that was the
Your
first book looking at the Impressionists and food themes in art.
At home, what was your at your your family's home, what kind of cooking was fashionable then?
Well, my father did a lot of the cooking. He was in the theater, and so he, in between jobs, he would take over the cooking. And we were kind of early vegetarian types, ate very little meat, fish, but a lot of whole grains and homey soups and stews, food like that. And my dad was a very experimental cook. My mother was more of the Julia child, kind of follow the long, complicated recipes and produce something great. My father has no patience for cookbooks, and I guess I'm in the middle.
Personality-wise as well?
Kind of. I like some structure, but I like the improv that you get when you shut the cookbook and then just do your thing.
Do you find yourself cooking in your own life?
Oh, every night.
Drawn to what kind of cooking?
Everything, but particularly fresh vegetables. And I have a farmer's market right by my house, and I'm there basically every market day.
Which is twice a week?
No, actually 4 days.
4 days a week?
Yeah.
What have you to say to the 3-minute in the microwave cook? As in frozen food that has to be defrosted.
Yeah, I don't, I think that everybody only has 24 hours in a day. Mm-hmm. And people choose to spend time doing different things in those 24 hours. Mm-hmm. And I think that food is an area that you really can't neglect. And if you do, it comes back to haunt you. Not that you have to slave away in the kitchen, but what's wrong with just bringing home some chicken and breading it, pounding it, breading it, boom, and then, having that with some greens, salad greens, and steaming some vegetables. And, you can produce a pretty nice meal in half an hour if you're organized. But you do have to think about it in advance.
Do people need to have a class to be organized, or can they pick that up easily?
No, they really can pick it up easily. I do actually teach cooking classes at a school, and I always tell people that I've never ordered takeout in my life.
We are amazed. I mean, all of us in the room here are amazed.
Yeah, and people are completely shocked because every night there's this sort of like revolving door of all the food that's being delivered to my building. And I say, I don't like the idea of a stranger showing up with my dinner in a bag. And, I'll I'll make an omelet. And, there's always something in the house because I just think that I don't know who prepared that food. By the time it gets to your house, I don't think it's in the best condition. I'm extreme. I realize that.
Do you have children?
Yeah, I have 2 kids, a 9-year-old daughter and a 2.5-year-old son. And my daughter's very funny about food because if we would go to a party,
right,
and she would have kind of a snacky dinner, just little things here or there. When she was little, she would come home, climb up into her high chair, and say, "I'm ready for dinner, Mommy." Because to her, her dinner meant that she sat down in her chair and she was served something that came from me. And I would say, "But you had your dinner already." And she would say, "No, but I want my dinner here, now." My son is on the go. Well, he's a 2.5-year-old boy. But, food is important. That's something I'm really passing on to the kids. And my husband's Italian, so it's not that I have to teach him anything.
Does he help you like your dad did in the cooking?
Well, on the weekends he does.
Yeah.
But he works long hours, so I'm the one who cooks,
For
weeknights. Yeah.
When you draw inspiration, where do you get your inspiration from? For another book, another lecture, what?
It's usually, my father taught me to keep my eyes wide open. He was in the theater and then moved into filmmaking. Mm-hmm. And he would take us to Central Park and have us open our eyes. This was in the 60s and 70s. You can imagine what Central Park was like.
I remember.
Yeah. Oh, yes, because, of course, you lived in New York. So I keep my eyes wide open and I look at what interests people. That's one of the ways I got into chocolate. I thought, people are responding to chocolate in a way that I've never seen before. So I decided to investigate what that was. So that's partly where ideas come from, story ideas or book ideas. Sometimes it's just something, a phenomenon or a pattern that I've seen. A pattern, for example, of lots of small artisanal chocolate boutiques opening in the Soho area. That was how I developed the walking chocolate tours, which I do, to see that they're kind of grouped together. Inspiration, just I think it's like walking through the market and I'll see beautiful radishes or beautiful zucchini, beautiful whatever, and I'll say, oh, I'm going to make this tonight. So I think that if you walk around truly with your eyes open,
good advice in any area.
Then you can, you see things.
What does it say about the culture when they're interested in food? Because now I'm reflecting. I mean, there's a great interest in wine, right? I mean, which kind of wine would it taste like? That's pretty old trend. But now even comparative water.
Oh, yes.
Right, and chocolate. What does that say about a culture?
Well, it says that we're certainly better traveled because invariably we learn these things from somewhere else. You know, the whole bottled water phenomenon, of course, came from Europe because we've had, relatively good quality tap water that we didn't have to do that. With chocolate, certainly, well, chocolate is an international kind of movement today, but a lot does come from Europe. Certainly, the couvertures, the kind of the raw material for chocolate making does come either from Belgium or from France. Of course, the raw materials come from places where people don't eat chocolate.
Right. Interesting.
The beans. But no, in fact, chocolate has sort of stood on the shoulders of like a cheese paradigm, which stood on the shoulders of wine in terms of our sensibilities and understanding, and coffee and tea, that's right, olive oil. There are all these specialty foods that we've come to say, like, what's that stuff that's in my cupboard?
You know what it says to me when that thing starts to happen? It says the culture is, generally speaking, richer. People have a little bit more money, and they've paid the rent, they bought the basics, right? They have a few clothes, now what, right?
Right.
And so that you get that more refined interest, or how can I add to my life, or how can I do it more sensorial than maybe acquisitive necessary
Sure.
things.
Well, food has always been a way of establishing one's status throughout,
tell us about that.
history. Well, the lavish use of spices in the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, when these ingredients were so costly, having a big feast in your home and inviting these many people, only people with a certain economic status could have that, and so and food knowledge as well, because food knowledge usually presupposes some kind of travel. Or the person says, I brought this olive oil back from Tuscany. We were at this little agriturismo there, and here, and you share it with your friends, and you've been here, you've been there. So it's some of it is about that. Some of it is just about a taste standard that's evolving, and you're right, certainly having the disposable income for that.
I've always been a fan of chocolate. Going back a really long time. And years ago, people say, you can't eat chocolate, too much saturated fat, or you're eating too much chocolate, you should have a vegetable, or whatever it was. And I always said, its decade will come. Because it seems to me that every decade, roughly, our food, not emphasis, but our food, not expectations, but even fears change. Our desires and fears change. So here we are, and chocolate is in its decade,
definitely. Yeah, I like that, looking at it by decade. Oh, totally. And I don't think that the chocolate will go out of fashion. Just because, when I think about chocolate, there's something much more mysterious about how chocolate comes to be than how wine comes to be or how cheese comes to be. I think most people have a general idea. Well, there's milk that comes from, some milk producing animal, and something happens to it, and then you see the cheese. But because the whole cacao cultivation happens in parts of the world where many of us never go, and cacao pods are these sort of primitive looking football-like, pods, and the raw material is so completely different from the finished product that, and there's something mysterious and sensuous, and the reputed aphrodisiac quality. The thing. So I think that it will really stay. Of course, how we view it will probably change. That there is too much fat in it, or there isn't, or it's a good fat, or it's a bad fat. Right now, I think the cocoa butter is considered a good fat, and the flavonols are considered good.
Recently, I was told that I'm allergic to a few things, including soy lecithin. So when I start looking at chocolate bars, I try to look for ones that don't have that. They are rare.
Well,
one or two
I
from
will
seven.
send you, if you tell me what you like, because I was surprised. This is a French company that the chocolate is a little bit hard to find. It's called Bonnat, B-O-N-N-A-T. It's a company that was founded in the 19th century, and it says, pure cocoa butter. And unless you know that there can be stabilizers added, you may not understand, well, why is that there in the first place? So this does not contain any lecithin.
Interesting. I'd like to know more about that later.
Yeah.
Because allergies, I think that's another big field that in time, I've always said that about medications. I can't wait for the time that they will be able to customize medications for people, the amount and, this and that. I mean, certain people don't twig well with certain medications and they take it off the market because a few couldn't handle it or something like that. But in any case, I thought they could customize medications. But wouldn't it be wonderful to customize food? You were saying, you go to the market and you get all the salads and you make this meal. And I know I do eat junk food recently quite a bit, and you feel differently. And
Definitely.
I think, well, you don't eat junk food, but those of us who have by necessity or desire do, you can feel a difference. And I think that we will be able in the years to come to customize what we eat. So we can want chocolate, but okay, it's chocolate and raspberries, or maybe there's an interaction. I can't wait for and the most interesting thing I read lately, and I'm sure you read this too, is taste receptors are not universal. They're dedicated to a particular aspect of the taste, such as sweetness, and they reside in different parts of the tongue.
Absolutely. Yes.
And therefore, it just occurred to me that if you really wanted, you could chew on one side or the other, depending on which...
To heighten, right, the astringency or the saltiness or the sweetness. And something else, people do not taste uniformly. There are people that are called super tasters.
Oh, I don't know about that.
And they tend to taste... They have a more heightened taste sense, which stands to... There are people that hear a little bit better, or, people that feel... whether it's kids that, don't like the feel of a material. They're just people that have a heightened sense.
It's said that the people who are older lose their sense of taste. Do you think that's so?
That's what I've heard.
How would you accommodate for something like that if you were a great foodie and you wanted to keep that sense of taste?
I guess you need to increase certain flavoring components. I mean, it wouldn't be good to add too much salt because generally you need to keep your sodium in check as well. But salt is a great flavor enhancer.
It's a flavor enhancer, but I think it's a flavor subsider in a certain way too, isn't it? For me, anyway, it is.
Really, generally,
because it's like a drum beat.
Yeah.
It brings out, but if there's too much, it floats over the top.
You have to. Salt is difficult to use correctly, but when there isn't enough, your food is completely flat, and you add a little bit, and all the flavors come out.
Do you go for fleur de sel and some of these exotic?
Oh, I have different salts.
You think it makes a difference?
I happen to like coarse salt.
Yeah.
Even sprinkled on a salad, because you bite into a grain of salt.
Interesting. How do you keep yourself whole living in the city?
Getting away on weekends to a fairly rural part of upstate New York where my neighbors are cows.
Is that a regular pastime?
Kind of. My husband, being European, would love to be in a more populated area. He would like to walk to town to buy a newspaper. But I'm perfectly happy not to see anyone except my family for the whole weekend. That's my sort of detox, decompress from all the craziness. Because living downtown, which is where everybody wants to live, it's just, there are too many people wanting to live in Manhattan today. I mean, everybody should be entitled to live there, but it's just, recently I had to go uptown, and I found myself on the subway at a time that I usually don't take the subway, because I'm usually with my son in the morning. Do you know that I couldn't even access the subway platform. I was backed up the stairs and behind a line of people on the stairs who were trying to access the platform to get onto the train. I couldn't believe it.
Yes,
That's
dangerous.
how
even.
many people are just trying to get onto the train, that kind of 5 to 9 crush.
When I was growing up in New York, I lived sort of midtown area, and they had none of the commercial buildings they have on Madison Avenue right now, and so the density was a whole lot lower.
Oh, yeah.
And now that we have what we have now, and probably more in the future, navigating is going to be just an issue, like you say, whether it's subways, taxis, or on foot.
Yeah, yeah. There's almost a permanent rush hour now, and sometimes I forget. I was going to lead a chocolate tour that I usually do in the morning, so I figured, oh, it's 8 minutes in a cab. Well, it was the wrong time of day, and it was more than 15 minutes.
Oh,
and it's not even, I could have practically walked there. Yeah, it's you really have to live on off hours. That was something that I noticed. If you do your banking or do your lawn, whatever it is, you need to live in off hours, because if you're trying to do
like
what everybody else is, yeah.
Do you find, when you travel around, you speak, do you find people's sensibilities are different depending on their geography, where they're living?
Well, they seem to not have the same kind of harried living problems. I guess the basic problems of raising your kids and all of those things are pretty much the same. Although I'm sure they have much more room in their apartment than I do, or their house.
Are their food interests the same?
Food interests, I find that they wish they had better restaurants where they are, or access to, well, here you mentioned the farmer's market. So that's wonderful. I think every community has to have a farmer's market. And not everyone.
What do you know about restaurants? Do they add in fine restaurants flavor enhancers or anything that you would not add at home other than maybe good spices?
Well, generally there's much more butter. There would be more fat, more cream. It's generally richer, and probably more salt.
In a restaurant?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And definitely the portions are larger than you should eat at home.
The reason I noticed that is of late I've had to be out of town, and occasionally at the hotel we would order room service, and then it was great if you ate it really hot, but if it was like 20 minutes or a half hour later, it just didn't taste like it would have at home, and there was nothing really unusual about it. I thought, what am I missing in the sauce, or what am I missing, or it's just my attitude?
Yeah. Well, good quality food should be good whether it's hot or cold.
Yeah.
And that's, the way McDonald's, if you were to eat the French fry cold, it's horrible.
I want to thank Alexandra for being with us today. We have learned a great deal from us. Be lucky in life. Have a family that trains you that love happens at dinner time at night. That is to say, food gets on the table and conversation continues, or at least initiates. It's also, in her case, quite good that her father participated in one style of cooking and her mother in another, more what do I want to say, la ruse, the other way. It also helps a serendipitous experience in life is very important. I always say, and there's a saying that you make your plans and then life happens to you, but it could be, that's always said, like something negative happens to you, but it could be something positive happens to you in your life. And here we have the perfect example. A woman who is very good scholastically, very good linguistically, had a desire to even work in a restaurant kitchen, tried it out, it just wasn't a good fit, and just an offhand remark by a professor gave her an opening to go in a direction that not only is she good at, but is terribly, terribly satisfying to her. And she can lateralize her career in a lot of ways. She can write, she can lecture, she can teach cooking, she can give tours. Or as at Matrix, she's going to lecture and have us eat and drink, so that's going to be really nice. But the other side of it is that we are all examples to other people, and to her children. she is that example that life happens around the table. Life happens when families sit together. Life happens when families eat together. And even her daughter, who went to a birthday party with surely enough food, came home and, okay, Mom, ready to eat. Well, why? Well, because I really have a sense of family. I also like particularly that you have to look for balance in life, that New York, as intense as it is, it needs a counterpoint, and her counterpoint is out of the city where there are cows. I love the fact that her father told her to keep her eyes really wide open, and he took her to Central Park, which was not good at that time, and asked her to look, because if you look in life, you will see all sorts of things, and sometimes quite differently than you expected them to be. So I encourage all of you to take a look at wherever you are and to look slowly, to see what's different, to savor that moment of time in what you're seeing. What I also liked a great deal about it, there's a certain calmness in Alexandra, and it's very good to maintain yourself in your life wherever you are, to let things in, be stimulated by them, but know that your life has to be in some kind of balance in personal relationships and professional opportunities and really in self-rhythms. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time, and just have a wonderful, wonderful week. And thank you so much, Alexandra. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank
you.
To contact Junia, send her an email at info@juniadoan.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadoan.com. Thanks for joining us. See you next time for Uncommon Sense with Junia Doan.